tofu can be controversial for people. They either love it or people can tend to hate it sometimes. But I would say that I've had a lot of success with people trying this version of tofu and liking it and saying that this is the first time I've tried tofu and I really liked it. Some things in recipes where tofu falls down and maybe fails to meet expectations are if it's too mushy, it's flavorless, or has minimal flavor. Those are kind of the two key things. So I'm going to show you some tricks to address that. The main thing to think about tofu is that it doesn't have a ton of flavor on its own. And so if you prepare it correctly, it's going to be able to absorb the flavor of whatever you add to it. So typically you want to marinate it, you want to include it with something that has a flavorful sauce. Unless you've been eating tofu for many years like I have, then maybe you can like it pretty plain, but it's definitely not the way that's going to convert someone to wanting to eat it. I personally now crave it and think it's delicious, but definitely have had a lot of bad tofu at restaurants, even as someone who likes it now. So first, I just want to show you how it comes in a package. So it will often come in a package like this. This is actually a block of tofu like this in a little bit of water and then just in a plastic container covered with like a piece of plastic wrap, basically. And so to get this out, you just slice into it around the edge. You'll usually miss most of the tofu, drain off the liquid, and then you get this. And sometimes it also comes in other types of containers, but that's the most common. So once you have it out of the package, what you want to do, if you want to add some firmness and chewiness, is you want to press the tofu. So I'm going to take a towel, using one that has a low amount of lint or no lint is a good idea. You can use paper towels, works perfectly fine. So you put the tofu in the towel, wrap it up, a couple layers is good, and then you put it on a plate. This is the easiest way if you don't have a fancy piece of equipment to do this. Put another plate on top and then maybe set some cans or something with a little bit of weight on it. If you push down with your fingers, you want it to have a little tiny bit of give, but not feel like it's just going to smush out. And then the longer you leave it and the more liquid that's released, the more firm and chewy it's going to get. And that's going to give you, some control over the chewiness of the tofu and the finished product. Another thing that's going to affect whether or not your tofu is chewy or not is the type of tofu you get. So this one here is a super firm tofu where a lot of that liquid is already excluded. This type is a little bit less finicky in terms of if you want it to be chewy and you don't want to spend a long time pressing the liquid out, then you really don't need to with this type. This other type that I had before, which is more commonly found in the grocery store, if you're just going to a typical grocery store, it's firm tofu. And this type of tofu is it's a little bit squishier than the super firm. Some super firm and extra firm are, pretty, they're kind of the same type of thing. Firm has a little bit more liquid. This one does benefit if you want a good chew to it to exclude some of the water by pressing it first. If you want it to be chewy, I'd avoid buying soft. If you try to press out the liquid from soft tofu, it tends to just mush. So that's really if you want that soft, more creamy texture. If you want a perfectly creamy texture, you would get something called silken tofu. That's really a different food. It's made with the same ingredients. It's still made with soybeans, and it's still tofu, but it's never going to get chewy. It's always going to be a creamy texture. That's what you might get in miso soup, in a lot of Asian cuisine, where you want that melt in your mouth creaminess. It's great for desserts and things where you want a really creamy, healthy base. You can blend it up and it becomes perfectly smooth and is largely flavorless. So again, it will take on the flavor of what you put it in, but that's not going to work well for what we want to do today, which is, having another like chewy umami protein in some of our bowls that we're going to make in a later class. Have the tofu, it's been pre-pressed. I'm going to cut it up. And some tips about marinating. So we're going to marinate this to give it some flavor, but first, I want to think about how long we have to marinate it, what we're going to use this for. So if you want it to marinate quickly, like soak up, get a good amount of flavor, and it doesn't take a long time, you want to cut smaller pieces like cubes. If you want it to be more of like a main dish, you want to display it kind of in place of some kind of meat or something like that on a plate, then you probably want to cut bigger pieces, but you also want to give it a lot longer to marinate, and you also probably want to make sure to have it with a good sauce because it's going to take a long time for any sort of marinade to permeate deep into the tofu. So I'm going to cube this up. And there's no special way to do that. Just keep your fingers out of the way of the knife and practice good knife safety, but otherwise, no special technique. All right. Okay. All right, so We have our cubes of tofu. Now we're going to make a marinade to put this tofu in. While I do that, some tips about tofu. So you can also look at the ingredients on your tofu, and some of them, this one is processed with calcium sulfate. So if it is processed with a calcium salt of some type, then it actually has a very high calcium content. So this package, the same size as this here, has 4.5 servings. Each are 70 calories, and they have, it's very low carbohydrate, no added sugars. It has 8 grams of protein, so this whole thing is 5 times that. So, a lot of protein sitting right here. And then calcium, this one has 8%. Some of them can have up to almost the same amount of calcium as a glass of milk. So that can vary pretty widely. If you're getting this as a main source of calcium, make sure to read the labels because the brands aren't necessarily interchangeable. So now I'm just going to make a quick basic marinade for the tofu. This marinade, if you're not someone who's used to having tofu plain, is really meant to be like a good base flavor, but you would still add it to something else with another flavor. So it might be stir-fried in another dish, it might have another sauce. If you're going to use this as the main and only marinade, I would probably increase the volume a bit. Here I have some minced up garlic, and then I have some tamari or soy sauce, the low sodium type, some kind of oil. I'm using some olive oil here, vegetable oil, canola oil work fine, and then some honey or agave syrup. You could use brown sugar or white sugar. Just, you want like a teaspoon or so of something sweet that will help caramelize the tofu. It's very low carbohydrate food. It doesn't have anything that's in there that's going to naturally allow it to caramelize. That'll give you a lot more umami flavor. So I'm gonna whisk these together in a bowl, and then we'll marinate our tofu. So get that out of there. So if you want to save time, once you've done this a couple times, there's really not any need to follow the recipe. I never follow the recipe at home. And I actually speed this up even a little bit more. If I'm really in a hurry, I won't chop the garlic. I'll just use some garlic powder, and it works great. You can add really any other spices, herbs, anything you want to this. It doesn't have to be this plain. Just going to whisk that up. Again, the only real reason you got to mix for a few seconds here is to get that honey or whatever sweetener you have mixed in. All right, it's mixed in. There's not much you can see there. Tofu is going to soak it up pretty quickly. So we're just going to take all of our cubes of tofu, put that in there, toss it around a little bit. You can let it sit if you want, but this is not very fussy. Again, we're going to add it to something else that has some flavor to it. So I just toss it to make sure that all the pieces look like they've got marinade on all the sides. So until it's really well coated. And then I'm going to get it into the oven. So some tips on putting this in the oven. Do not put it directly on a plain sheet pan and think that it's going to come off. It's not. Even if you grease it or spray it, it's going to be fairly likely to stick. All right, so we have it totally coated. So what I do, which is foolproof, is I take my sheet pan, I put this paper on it called parchment paper. This allows it, basically anything you put on there, to not stick. And especially if you're cooking with low oil sorts of foods, it's great because then you're not having to add a lot of grease to prevent sticking. I'm just going to pour the tofu on there, and then we'll get this in the oven. For roasting, you want to make sure that, again, you have a single layer. You don't want to use a tiny pan and have this all piled up together. Try and use up the real estate on the pan, give it some space. There's some space between the pieces. The heat can circulate more effectively in the oven, and it's going to crisp up and brown, caramelize better. All right, I think that looks perfect. So we preheated our oven, and we'll go ahead and put that in there now. While our tofu is cooking in the oven at 400 degrees Fahrenheit, I'm going to make a sauce to go with it. We're going to make a peanut sauce. So in our theme of using world flavors, we're going to do this. It has a bit of a Thai, Indonesian feel, so you're getting some flavors from those parts of the world. And let me explain the ingredients that we have. So we have some peanut butter, we have some sliced scallions, some chopped cilantro, some soy sauce or tamari, some brown sugar, some minced ginger, and some chili garlic sauce. This chili garlic sauce is really like a prepared sauce that has chili and garlic, just as the name suggests. And it's nice because you can just quickly add a touch of those flavors to any dish and adding more will add more than a touch, and it's a way that if you're cooking for people who have varying taste preferences, say you have someone who doesn't want any spice and someone else who loves spice, it's great to have that around because you can, kick up the spice level on just an individual portion pretty quickly. We're going to add it to this sauce, and then we have a lime to bring out some brightness because the nut-based sauces can be a little heavy otherwise. And let me mention a note about food allergies. So peanuts are one of the most common food allergies. So you're not out of luck if you have that or have someone in your family with that. You want to make this sauce sunflower butter. Sunflower seed butter works great as a replacement. It tastes very similar when it's done and same texture, so that's a great replacement. You just want to make sure that, like anyone with food allergies, you look at the labels and make sure to say that it's in a peanut-free facility because sometimes other nut butters or seed butters are processed in a plant that makes peanut butter. And then you can also use other nut butter. So you could use almond butter or cashew butter, whatever your taste preference. Almond butter makes it taste a lot different, but it's still a very good sauce. If you're looking for something that's just a pretty equal replacement, definitely stick with sunflower seed butter, making sure that you get the kind that's just sunflower seeds. If you get the kind that's salted or it has sugar added, which a lot of them have sugar added, then you're going to need to, you could still use it, but you might reduce the sugar or you might reduce the salty component like the soy sauce in this recipe. So again, you can make a lot of variations in cooking. The more you learn, the easier it is to modify and just use what you have on hand instead of having to go out and buy lots of new or different ingredients. So there's no special way to add this together. You just put everything in the bowl and mix it up. So we're going to add our chili garlic sauce, our minced ginger. We're going to add, you can add a portion of the brown sugar. So for things I like to use small amounts of, I might add part of it and then adjust the flavoring a little bit more later. I know that we're going to need at least this much tamari, so I'll go ahead and add all of that. And then I'm going to save the cilantro and scallions until I'm done whisking, adjusting the seasoning. It's a little bit harder to whisk with the big chunks in there. So do this, we're going to add our peanut butter. Let's have a natural peanut butter. It's just ground up peanuts. There's nothing else added to it. If you really don't want to buy a bunch of ingredients and you have a good blender, you don't need to buy nut butters at all. You can just blend them up and make your own anytime you want. Okay. So we have our peanut butter there. And then this is going to be thicker than we want as a sauce. So I'm just going to mix it up a little bit, and then we have our hot water in our kettle over here. And that's just going to be what we use to adjust the consistency or the thickness. I recommend highly starting with room temperature peanut butter. Don't use it straight out of the fridge. You won't be able to whisk it. All right, so you can see it's very thick. This is not a sauce, right? Not a sauce. We're gonna add our hot water to it. And it makes more sense to get the texture, consistency you want first before you start adjusting the flavoring, because you can imagine you can get it perfect, and then if you water it down a bunch, it's no longer perfect, and you have to do it all over again. It'll save you a little time. Make sure your water is hot, so that you'll see that this is even going to be a little challenging to whisk together. It will eventually kind of melt into that hot water. If you use cold water, you will never mix it together. And if you do manage to mix it together, it will be chunky, like it doesn't emulsify, it doesn't look nice. It's not a nice texture. Oops. Some splashing is probably going to happen. All right. So when you're trying to figure out what consistency to aim for, it can be whatever you like, but I would encourage you to make it thinner than you think you're going to need. Nuts are a thickener, so as it sits, it's going to thicken up. So if you get it exactly the way you want it, and then let it sit and finish your meal, it'll be kind of pasty or too thick when you go to eat. So you can have it just like this. We have a nice, nice pourable sauce you can drizzle over things. It's also nice to make it a little on the thin side. Nuts have lots of healthy fats. If you're in any way concerned about your calories, though, there's a lot of calories in them. So the thinner you make it, the easier it is to just get a little bit on each bite and not have like a big chunk that's going to have tons of extra calories. And now that we have the consistency we want, the next thing we want to do is adjust the flavoring. So the last things we want to add is this lime. Nice juicy lime, we'll give that a squeeze. And then if you want to add more salt, you could have that handy. I know that this is a good amount typically, so I'll go ahead and taste it and double check. But if you want it spicier, I'd also recommend adding more of that chili garlic sauce. The other thing we want to check for is sweetness. Remember, we have that brown sugar in reserve, so I'm just going to go ahead and stir that up. Okay. Go ahead and take a taste. Yeah, it's perfectly salted, so that's good. You know, I personally would probably have a little more chili garlic sauce. It does need a little more sweetness. I'm gonna go ahead and add the rest. And I'm gonna use the rest of that lime, and I think we're going to be ready to go. Again, before you add more salt, make sure to get it right where you want it with the acidity, because that's gonna help reduce how much you need in the end. You can save these as a garnish and just garnish the dish that you serve with them, or you can mix it in the sauce. I think I'm gonna save mine as a garnish. So, some of our tasting spoon. Perfect. So tasty. I can't wait to dip our roasted tofu in this. It's still very hot. So what you're really looking for is there's these nice caramelized bits, there's a little crispness to the edges. It's still not crispy on the inside, which if you get it crispy on the inside, you've cooked it far too long. But as it cools off, it will also even continue to firm up. So this is really the look that you're going for. If there's not as much color, even if you've cooked it the amount of time that says in the recipe, it may be that you didn't get as much liquid out as I had, or maybe the tofu I bought was firmer. So cook it as long as you need to get this appearance, rather than sticking exactly to the amount of time in a recipe. And now we're going to get the peanut sauce ready and dish this up. This is going to be so delicious in the peanut sauce. Also having some roasted vegetables or some blanched vegetables, really incredible with this. I just want to give you an example of a way that you could put that on a plate and serve it. Ideally, you know, it would be one of many items, but I'll just show you how to plate it on its own. I have a small plate here. I'm going to cut some lime wedges. I'm just going to roll this lime. It will help release some of the juices when I cut it. If you cut it in half and then make wedges, they tend to have some pith in there or some white. So I'm going to cut it just a little bit off center. You can see then you're getting, there's no part where the juice can't be released when you squeeze it. So and you can tell, compared to cutting it straight through the middle, there's just so much more lime flavor there. So let me grab my tofu. Have our pan here. It's cooling off. We're just going to go ahead and put some on the plate. A few little pieces here. All right, and then you can go ahead and drizzle the peanut sauce over. But I will caution you, drizzling brown sauce over things tends to not be very attractive. So what's nice is if you get like a little serving container, make sure with your peanut sauce to go ahead and give it a mix. Again, it can start to get a little discolored on top, a little dried out on top. So you might want to fill up a little dish. Set it on the side, and then the scallion and cilantro that we had reserved before, you can just sprinkle a little bit over the top. You can also sprinkle a little on the peanut sauce to kind of, anything you can do to detract from the brown a little bit is kind of nice, to break up the appearance a little bit. You can serve it with that lime wedge. And then the goal would be that you would squeeze that over, just be a really, really delicious protein option. So this is our roasted tofu, complete with the peanut sauce, garnished with our scallion, cilantro, and a wedge of lime.